Mega Man X-Treme, released in the year 2000 for Game Boy Color. Why they call it X-Treme? I don't know. All I know is that whenever you put X-Treme in your title, you're only setting yourselves up for disappointment. And sure enough, Mega Man X-Treme is not X-Treme. It's just Mega Man X. Really, it's just Mega Man X with bits of Mega Man X2 tossed in for good measure. And it's an admirable effort, and it's not bad for what it is. It's just not X-Treme. Anyway, stupid title aside, Mega Man X-Treme is the first entry in the Mega Man X series to grace Nintendo's portable handheld, and also serves as the final Mega Man game to grace the original Game Boy, since this is one of those black game packs that's backwards compatible with the classic model. It's a bit of a stretch, but when I bought this way back in the day, it was another game to play on my Game Boy Pocket. And I wouldn't get to play this in some semblance of color until I got myself the GBA SP model years later. But yeah, back in the day, if you wanted Mega Man X on the go, X-Treme was your best option, but does it hold up? With the classic Mega Man Game Boy titles, with the exception of the fifth game, they take some elements from the NES games and build new stages and mechanics around them. So in some ways, it was retreading old territory, but at the same time, they were new games, especially when some existing weapons had new properties to play with. In Mega Man X-Treme, they pretty much recreate some of the stages from the first two Mega Man X games, shrink them down a bit, and turn them into a Game Boy Color game. So even though it's touted as a new game in the series, it's really just an abridged version of the first two SNES games, with some changes here and there to accommodate the new style and omitted elements. And for what it's worth, they did an admirable job considering the limitations of what they were working with. So you start a new game and you're on that familiar central highway, killing the same robots, the choppers, and you even get to face off against Vile, or Vava as the game calls them. Localization, what's that? From there, it's off to the stage select where you're given 4 Mavericks to tackle. Chill Penguin, Storm Eagle, and Spark Mandrill from X1, and Flame Stag from X2. Beat all 4 Mavericks to tackle the final levels, 2 Fortress levels from X1 and X2, and a final boss rush level before facing off against Sigma. That's not a spoiler, that's a feature. Once you beat the game, you can play the game's hard mode, which pits you against another set of 4 Maverick stages. Armored Armadillo from X1, a Magma Centipede, Morph Moth, and Wheel Gator from X2. Now you could start a new game in this mode, or you could carry over your previous save, at which point any armored pickups will be carried over, and the 4 capsules in this mode will grant you these 0 scramble items, each of which summons 0 to do a different attack at a cost of a shared energy meter. The amount of times I've used these probably ranks around 0, no pun intended, but it's better than 0. Okay, whatever. And then once you beat hard mode, you get the extreme mode, which gives you all 8 Mavericks to tackle from the get-go like a proper console Mega Man game, which is probably what this should have been from the get-go, but I guess you needed a story reason to split these up, and there's a lot of story that plays out in these cutscenes that you cannot skip at all. It's not much, it's a couple new characters that get introduced and promptly killed off before the game ends. Sorry if I spoiled the movie for anybody. And there's an occasional typo or two here and there, but whatever. It's something to provide context, and to its credit, Extreme Mode nixes all the story bits and gives you nothing but gameplay. In any event, Extreme borrows mostly from X1, not only in terms of borrowing some stages and bosses, but also bringing in the armor from that game. Increased defense, another level of Buster Charge, and being able to break bricks with your head and legs, as well as an improved dash jump. Suffice it to say, if you play the SNES originals, then seeking out the capsules and heart containers shouldn't be too much of a chore, and the stages that didn't originally have the capsules aren't too hard to find either. You might need a thing or two extra to reach them, however. The controls are awkward since the Game Boy has fewer buttons than the stock SNES controller, so there are workarounds. Obviously, there's no instant cycling of weapons due to the lack of trigger buttons, but dashing is handled in 3 ways. You can either A. Double tap the direction you wish to dash, B. Press down and A to dash, a command usually associated with sliding, and this is how I usually do it, or C. You press the start button. And this last option is what will likely throw you off at times, since pressing start usually brings up the weapons menu in these Mega Man games, but now that's done by pressing select, which isn't bad per se, but throws you off at times when you're wanting to switch weapons, instinctively press start, and suddenly you're dashing into a bed of spikes. Good job, guys. For the most part, control is fairly responsive, though X feels a bit too loose and floaty for my taste, particularly in terms of the jumping, which feels very spastic. Things are compounded once you get the leg upgrade, which gives you a bit of a boost in terms of wall jumping, but this somehow makes climbing more narrow passages even more of a chore. These are things you have to adjust to if you're going to survive X-Treme's challenges. X-Treme also runs a little faster compared to the SNES originals, which might seem like a good thing because X1 and X2 usually suffer from bouts of slowdown, and that's not really the case here. Kind of. Faster gameplay, however, breeds faster enemies, some of which hit really hard and amps up difficulty in situations that would normally be a cakewalk. This, along with the new dashing mechanics, are things you need to relearn, as well as how levels work, because X-Treme doesn't have long levels that you can explore, but rather they have levels split into mini-segments. Every so often you'll come across these checkpoints that will auto-save your game, which is a nice, convenient thing to have when you're gaming on the go, though the save goes away when you load it up again. But these checkpoints act as a transition between these segments. So you play one segment of level until you reach a checkpoint, which will load up a new segment of level while blocking you off from the previous segment. To put it simply, this makes backtracking impossible because these are technically different stages. So if you missed a vital upgrade in one segment but you already passed the checkpoint to another segment, you're pretty much screwed and you have to restart the level to go back to that point where you missed the upgrade. Now, all that having been said, and with all the concessions that had to be made in order to get the game running on the Game Boy Color, Mega Man X-Treme is still a fairly impressive piece of work for what it is. The levels have been fairly recreated, albeit abbreviated, and with some alterations made to accommodate for missing features, particularly the X2 levels where you'd normally have air dashing, and that's no longer a thing here. The boss fights play out as they did before, though again, some might be tougher due to the extra speed and slightly longer recovery time between hits. The various weapons you gain have been retained from the SNES originals and work more or less as they did before, although some might have gotten a bit of a nerf and probably are not as effective as they were originally. And while we're on the subject of nerfing, yes, X-Treme does have the secret capsule in that one stage there that gives you the Street Fighter moves. Both of them. They're done differently too. You charge your buster and you either hold up and release the fire button to execute a dragon punch, or hold down and release the fire button to perform a fireball. Unlike in the SNES games, you don't need full health to pull them off, and they're also saved into memory, which is nice, but they've been nerfed considerably, going from one-hit insta-kill attacks to doing barely more damage than a charge shot, and the Dragon Punch doesn't have quite the reach of its SNES counterpart, which makes me wonder why they even bothered adding these in there to begin with, since their value has been diminished greatly as a result. Really, if there's a major downside to Mega Man X-Treme, it's the lack of anything new. I mean, you got a couple new bosses to fight, but in terms of actual new content, it's pretty slim pickings. I suppose by 2000 standards, the idea of an SNES game compressed into a Game Boy Color game pack was all the appeal it needed, and it certainly wowed me back in the day. But nowadays, not so much, especially when there are options available to play the real deal on the go. The graphics of Mega Man X-Treme is a bit of an uneven bag, but still pretty decent for the most part. The cutscenes are basic but serviceable, the levels made the 8-bit transition fairly well with some colorfully decent backgrounds and layouts, and the sprite work isn't too bad. Scaling of some of the larger enemies is a bit off, but that's been an issue with the classic series as well, so I won't give them too much grief on that count. There is considerable flicker that makes smaller things like projectiles harder to make out, which is probably worse off when playing on a Game Boy Color or even Game Boy Classic without any lighting. Oh yeah, Mega Man X-Treme is one of those black game packs that's also backwards compatible with original Game Boy and Super Game Boy hardware, and it's fine. Not quite as detailed as the colored version, the very few foreground elements are missing entirely in this format, smaller bits are even harder to make out in this state, and there's considerably more slowdown here than on the Game Boy Color, but it's not all bad actually. No special features for playing this on the Super Game Boy, which is a bit unfortunate, but whatever. Audio-wise, it's fine. The sound effects aren't anything special, but the music's alright, mostly 8-bit renditions of the appropriate tunes from X1 and X2, but they're perfectly adequate adaptations regardless. It's too bad you can barely hear them over the obnoxious charge noise, but whatever. Overall, Mega Man X-Treme on Game Boy Color is an admirably adequate conversion job. For what they were able to accomplish in porting the Super Nintendo games onto the Game Boy Color format, it turned out quite well all things considered, even with some of the concessions that were made to make the game playable in this format. It's probably not the most ideal Mega Man experience, especially nowadays with the main games being available in some form or fashion, and there's a bit of an adjustment to be made in order to get a feel for how this handles, but for what it is and what it is intended to do, I thought Mega Man X-Treme was perfectly acceptable Mega Man fare. It was fun to revisit this for the first time in forever, and it holds up quite nicely for the most part. Without any unique content, however, X-Treme has very little replay value and might not be to everyone's taste. If you've never played a Mega Man or a Mega Man X title before, this would not be the ideal game to start off. But as far as Mega Man games go, I've played worse, and Mega Man X-Treme is a solid D-make, warts and all.